Hello, good morning and welcome to this morning's webinar, How to Support Your Premature Child at School, hosted by The Smallest Things and the University of Leicester. My name is Sarah Miles. I'm a trustee and director of The Smallest Things Premature Baby Charity, and I'm delighted to welcome you here to our webinar this morning. Now, like all trustees, I myself am a parent of a premature child. And you can see my daughter Charlotte there, who was born at 28 weeks. So the Prem Aware Award was launched by The Smallest Things back in 2020. And we've managed to do some of these live events for teachers and educational professionals, but this is the first one we're doing specifically for parents and carers. So we're really excited to be able to bring this to you today to help grow your understanding of prematurity and how it can affect children at school. So on to today's lineup. We are kicking off with Professor Samantha Johnson, Professor of Child Development at the University of Leicester, and she's going to be revealing latest research findings into how premature children do at school. Next up, we'll have Katrina Ogilvie, founder of The Smallest Things, to tell us about the Prem Aware Award. After that, we've got Nicola Scott, who was born at 24 weeks back in 1989, and I'm going to be talking to her about her experience at school. Following that, we're back to Professor Samantha Johnson to talk about how schools can improve support and understanding for children born prematurely. Then we've got a short video. 4 teachers from our Prem Aware schools are going to tell us all about their experience. Next up is going to be over to my fellow trustee and director, Matt Wilkinson, to tell us about being a parent to children born prematurely who are at primary school at the moment. And then finally, we've got that all-important panel Q&A. So without further ado, it is my absolute honour to be able to introduce Professor Samantha Johnson, who is the Professor of Child Development at the University of Leicester, to the stage to share her team's insights into the learning outcomes of premature children.
Thank you, Sarah, and welcome to everybody who is joining at home today. It's really great you're able to join us. So as Sarah has said, I'm a Professor of Child Development here at the University of Leicester. And for the last 20 years or so, I've been studying what happens to premature babies as they grow up. And over that time, I've become increasingly interested in how premature birth can affect children's development and learning, and importantly, what kinds of support they might need at school. So we are delighted here at the University of Leicester to be working in partnership with the Smallest Things charity to bring you this webinar today. So the aims of my next 20 minutes or so are to try and explain to you what we know from research about how premature birth can affect children's development and learning. And if your child does have difficulties, what kinds of support they might need in school. And hopefully you may leave feeling more prepared and empowered to approach your child's school about issues relating to prematurity, if that's something you might wish to do. So to do this, I'm going to present some key facts and figures about premature birth and summarise what we know from research about the impact of premature birth on children's cognitive development, their social and emotional development, and outcomes at school. Now, I've got the research bit, so I am going to be presenting some graphs and some figures for those who are interested in the numbers. If you're less so, don't worry, just listen to me and I will explain it all. So to start then, those key facts and figures. What is premature or preterm birth? Well, I'm sure we all know that a typical full-term pregnancy will last around 40 weeks of gestation. And most babies, the vast majority of babies in the UK, are born at term between 37 and 42 weeks of gestation. So around about 92% of babies are born at term. Preterm babies are those that are born before 37 weeks of gestation. And that equates to around 8% of all births in the UK, and that's about 50,000 babies per year. There's a smaller group of babies who are born very preterm, before 32 weeks of gestation. And within that group, there's an even smaller subgroup of babies who are born extremely preterm, before 28 weeks of gestation. And they're a much smaller number, so only about 1% of babies a year are born very or extremely preterm. But those are the children who I guess we are most concerned about in terms of their long-term outcomes. And this is because gestational age at which babies are born can not only have a different impact on their need for neonatal care after birth, but also on their long-term outcomes. And as I'm going to describe to you now, and for that reason, we often classify children into these groups when we're studying the effects of prematurity. So with that in mind, what do we know about the long-term consequences of preterm birth? Well, we know that on average, as a group, children who are born preterm are at higher risk for developmental problems and disorders later in life than children who are born at term. We also know that premature birth may affect multiple areas of a child's development. So even children without severe difficulties may have multiple mild difficulties in many areas of their development, which combined can still have quite a significant impact on their learning and their performance at school. Whilst most of our research has focused on very preterm born children, we do know from recent studies that effects of prematurity may be seen after birth at all preterm gestations. That means that even those babies born late or moderately preterm at 32 to 36 weeks of gestation may have some difficulties, albeit slightly higher risk of difficulties than children who are born at term. But what is very clear from the research is that the risk of difficulties later in life is related to a baby's gestational age at birth. So put simply, this means the earlier a baby is born, the greater the risk for difficulties with their development later in life. And for that reason, it's babies born very, and particularly extremely preterm, who are at highest risk. We also know that where those developmental problems are present, often they may appear in infancy in the first few years of life, and they may persist through to adulthood. We also know, however, that only a very small proportion of children born preterm, even those born very or extremely preterm, have severe disabilities. So things such as blindness, deafness, or maybe physical disabilities such as cerebral palsy. But many more children may have cognitive problems or social emotional difficulties following their preterm birth, when those are much more common than physical difficulties. And this slide here shows the 6 areas of cognitive and social emotional development which we know that premature babies might be at risk for. And I'm going to describe each of these to you very briefly in turn. But before I start, just for those who are not familiar with the term cognitive development, this relates to a group of thinking skills that allow us to reason, to problem solve, to process information mentally, and to remember and learn. So these kind of skills are really important for how children do at school. So let's take a look at these 6 areas of potential difficulties that some preterm children might have. So first of all, we know that children born preterm are at higher risk for difficulties with working memory than children who are born at term. So working memory can be thought of like a mental notepad that we can use to hold information in mind for a short period of time whilst thinking about something else. So for example, holding in mind a long list of instructions whilst you're implementing each step. And we know that children who have working memory difficulties often struggle to process a long list of instructions, or might have particular difficulty carrying out tasks that have multiple steps. They also may struggle where there's lots of distractions in the environment and where they feel there's too much information for them to be able to hold in mind at one time. We also know that on average, children who are born preterm may have slower processing speed than term-born children. Processing speed is generally the time taken to complete mental tasks or process information mentally. And this means that children with slower processing speed might take longer to read or comprehend instructions or to complete tasks that they're working on. And so they might need a little bit of extra time to complete activities in the classroom. We also know that children who are born preterm may have difficulties with fine motor skills, or with visuospatial processing or hand-eye coordination. And these kind of skills are really important for many different activities in the classroom, right through from getting changed for PE, participating in sports and navigating the classroom environment, through to writing, drawing, using scissors, or copying from the whiteboard. We also know that a very small proportion of children born preterm may have developmental coordination disorder, and that's more frequent in preterm than term-born children. And that's a disorder that's associated with quite significant difficulties with movement. But that's still quite rare, and actually many more prematurely born children might have difficulties with eye-hand coordination or visuospatial processing that still impact on their learning and performance at school. We also know that children born preterm are more likely to have learning difficulties, and that of all the subjects studied at school, they're most likely to have difficulties with mathematics, and I will explain that shortly. We also know preterm children are at higher risk for difficulties with attention or concentration than children born at term. So they might have difficulty paying attention in the classroom, or they might appear as though they're quite disorganised, or they're forgetful or lose things easily. We also know that prematurely born children are at higher risk for ADHD than term-born children. So that's attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. And interestingly, where preterm children do have ADHD, often they have more difficulties with attention and perhaps less so with hyperactivity or being impulsive. But the risk of ADHD is still quite low overall, and many more preterm children may have attention difficulties that aren't severe enough for a diagnosis, but which still impact on their learning at school. And finally, we know that children born preterm are at higher risk for social and emotional problems. In particular, they may be shy or anxious or withdrawn, nervous or clingy in new situations, and may feel sad, lonely, or depressed. We also know they're at higher risk for social difficulties, so they might have difficulties maintaining or making friendships, interacting with peers, or working in groups. They may prefer the company of adults over other children. And we do know that children in general with social difficulties may become isolated, and we do know that children born very preterm are at higher risk of being bullied than children born at term, and this may impact their mental health and well-being. We also know that the rates of autism are higher amongst preterm children, particularly those born extremely preterm, than term-born children. But just as with ADHD, the rates of autism is still quite rare, and only a small proportion will have a diagnosis. But many more children might have social or communication difficulties, which still impact on how they integrate and how they do at school. Interestingly, what we also know from many research studies is that prematurely born children tend not to be at increased risk of externalizing behaviour problems. This means they're no more likely than term-born children to have what we might think of typically as behaviour problems, to be disruptive or aggressive or antisocial. They tend not to be the children who disrupt the classroom or who are fighting in the playground. And this is really important because of this kind of pattern of difficulties and the fact that these children tend not to be more antisocial or disruptive in the classroom. And in fact, preterm children often can appear quite compliant and eager to please and unwilling to ask for help. This means that if the school isn't aware of prematurity and what that can mean for the child, that the premature children's difficulties may go undetected in school and they may not receive the support that they could need. Of course, I probably don't need to tell you that that might have significant implications for education and for schooling. And it will be no surprise that research also shows that on average, as a whole group, children born preterm, particularly those born very and extremely preterm, have poorer educational outcomes than children who are born at term. And this is shown really clearly in this graph taken from the PRISM training that you'll hear about later today. And this uses data from 19 local authority areas in Scotland. And this shows the proportion of children with special educational needs in relation to their gestational age at birth. So the bars here show the percentage of children with special educational needs. So the higher the bars, the greater the percentage of children. And along the x-axis at the bottom, this shows the week of gestation when children were born. So from the far right, at 40 weeks of gestation, which is full term, moving to the left, right down to 24 weeks of gestation. And I think the most interesting or important thing about this graph is the shape of those bars. So if you move from the right-hand side to the left, you see those bars gradually increase, especially when you get below 32, 31, 30 weeks of gestation. And this really shows how outcomes or long-term outcomes can be related to children's gestational age at birth. Now, I'm often asked how many children have special educational needs. Well, that can differ between studies, but in this study, this equates to around 1 in 20 children who were born at term gestations, around 1 in 12 children who were born late or moderately preterm, around 1 in 5 children born very preterm, and up to, in our own studies carried out here at Leicester, up to 2 in 3 children born extremely preterm before 26 weeks of gestation. So I think this clearly shows how gestational age can have an impact on children's development. It won't impact every child, and not every child will have difficulties and certainly won't have special educational needs. But on a group level, there is an association between the earlier a baby is born and educational outcomes. Of course, not all children will have special educational needs, but we do see a similar pattern of results if we look at academic attainment. And this graph now shows children's attainment in the early years foundation stage at the end of reception year at age 5. So we start with full term, again on the right-hand side, moving down to early term, late preterm, moderate preterm, and very preterm on the bar on the left-hand side. Now this time, the bars show the percentage of children who fail to get a good level of attainment in the early years. And again, you see that rise as you go from right to left, where the more preterm children are born, the less likely they are to have the good or the expected level of attainment in the early years. And this equates to around 51% of full-term children who failed to achieve that level, compared with 66% of those born very preterm. Now, this looks a bit busy, but it's actually the same graph, but this time showing you the results for all of the 6 different areas of learning in the early years. So personal, social, emotional development, communication and language, mathematics, knowledge and understanding of the world, physical development, and then creative development on the right-hand side. And I think all that I want to demonstrate from this is that we see the same pattern of results in every area of the curriculum in the early years foundation stage. So we see that impact, or the potential impact of prematurity, right from starting school and right across all areas of the national curriculum. But as well, from other studies, we also know that of all the subjects studied at school, prematurely born children are most likely to have difficulties with mathematics. And we know from our studies here in Leicester and in the UK that actually mathematics difficulties for preterm children are most likely related to their cognitive difficulties that I described earlier, rather than to deficits with numerical skills. And they're particularly related to difficulties with working memory or with visuospatial skills, because mathematics can rely quite heavily on having good skills in these areas. So their mathematics difficulties are related to those areas of potential difficulty I previously described. And this means that intervention for children with other kinds of mathematical difficulties, such as dyscalculia, are unlikely to be effective for preterm children. And we think they may be better supported in the classroom by teachers supporting their working memory and their visuospatial skills when learning mathematics. Now, is this only a problem for the preschool and the primary school years? And indeed, over the last 20 or so years, I've heard quite a lot of professionals say, or tell me, it's okay, they'll catch up. By the time they get to secondary school, it will come out in the wash and these children will catch up with their peers. And I think that is absolutely true. We've got to remember that for some preterm children, they will have absolutely no difficulties at all, educationally, cognitively, or social, emotionally. But for those that do, on average, we find in studies that those children born very preterm in particular and extremely preterm as a group tend not to catch up with their peers. So this graph is the same as before, but now it shows attainment in Key Stage 2 when children sit their SATs at the end of Year 6 at age 11. Here we see the same shape of the graph, but this time it's the moderate and the very preterm who are at higher risk for not having the expected level of attainment in English and mathematics in their Key Stage 2 SATs at the end of primary school. So this equates to around about 16% of full-term children who fail to get that level of achievement, up to 39% of those children born very preterm. So at the end of primary school, on average, as a group, moderate and very preterm children are falling behind their term-born peers. And now this shows exactly the same graph, but for GCSEs. And this time the bars show the percentage of children not achieving 5 GCSEs, grades A to C, including in English and mathematics. And now you'll see it's really the very preterm children whose attainment on average is poorer than children born at term. And in fact, 44% of full-term children failed to achieve this level of GCSEs, compared with 60% of those born very preterm. So even though prematurity can affect children all gestations, and there are larger numbers of late and moderately preterm born children, we know from research that the earlier a baby is born, the greater the risk. So it's those children who are born very and extremely preterm who are at the greatest risk for these kinds of difficulties. But even among those groups, there are a large proportion who will have no lasting problems at all. So if we try and put all this together, we know that children born preterm on average are at higher risk for cognitive, social, emotional, attention difficulties and learning difficulties. And so if you were to go to the school and say, my child might need some support, what areas might they need support? These, going back to the 6 areas I described previously, are the kinds of difficulties children have and the areas that you can tell the teacher or your early years provider they may need some help. So attention problems, working memory difficulties, slow processing speed, poor hand-eye coordination, social emotional problems, and mathematics difficulties. So hopefully that's helped you understand a little bit about what kinds of difficulties you might be considering if you're a parent of a preterm child and what support is needed. I guess practically one of the most important things parents can do is attend neonatal follow-up appointments where they are offered. So here in the UK, routine developmental follow-up is usually offered everywhere for children who are born very preterm, before 30 weeks of gestation. And in 2017, the National Institute of Health and Care Excellence, that's NICE, recommended that children born less than 30 weeks of gestation should be followed up and have an assessment at 24 months of age to check their development. And that actually those born less than 28 weeks of gestation, extremely preterm, should ideally have another assessment at 4 years of age, which should be helpful for informing the school what kinds of support they might need. I think nationally that hasn't been as easy to implement, and that isn't happening in all areas yet. But certainly a lot of very preterm children will be offered an assessment at 2 years, and that should be taken up because that will help people identify early any difficulties. But we're still left with a problem in that most children won't have follow-up. So most preterm children are born late and moderately preterm, and they won't be offered neonatal follow-up unless they have other developmental problems or neonatal difficulties. And also, most of the children, very preterm children who are followed up, if they don't have severe disabilities, they may be discharged from neonatal care. And that is the last point of routine contact with healthcare that the parent and the child might have. And we know, and we frequently hear from parents actually, that problems seem to emerge over the preschool years before the child starts school. And this means that after 2 years, identifying difficulties and providing appropriate support is falling more and more to education services. It seems to be the job of the school to pick up where healthcare possibly left off for these children to figure out what support might be needed. And without any routine sharing of information between health and education services, this means that the school might not know about your child's prematurity. And therefore, as a practical step, if you feel it's appropriate, it may be helpful to discuss your child's birth history with the school. But importantly, we don't just want to tell them your child was born preterm. We want to tell them what this means, how it might affect children's development, and what they can do to support your child in school if they have difficulties. And there are resources that we have developed with my research team and also with the Smallest Things charity to help you do this. And you'll hear more about that later on this morning. But before I finish this first section, I've got just a couple of summary points and take-home messages that I'd really like to reiterate. So in summary, the research tells us that on average, as a group, children born preterm, particularly those born very and extremely preterm, are at higher risk for cognitive, attention, social and emotional difficulties than children born at term. These may impact on their performance at learning and performance at school and their learning. And for that reason, we also know that as a group, on average, children born preterm are at higher risk for special educational needs and poorer academic attainment than term-born children, particularly in mathematics. This means that prematurely born children may need additional support in school. And we also know that that special constellation or pattern of difficulties I've described in those 6 areas means that preterm born children may not be the types of children who would disrupt the classroom. They tend not to have externalizing behaviour problems, and that means their difficulties may be overlooked in school because they might not come to the teacher's attention as having special educational needs in the same way that other children do, because they're not so disruptive. And that means we often hear parents talk about the fact they feel their child may have fallen under the radar. We know that education professionals have a really key role to play in identifying children's needs if they are there and providing support. So it's really important that schools are aware of prematurity and know how to support your child if they need it. And 2 final points, really important. The first is that every child is different. As a professional, as a parent, we all know this, and therefore an individual approach to support is ultimately needed. We know if a child is born preterm, we could look at those 6 areas of difficulty I have described, and that might help as a starting point. But ultimately, every child is different, premature or not, and we need to take an individual look at their strengths and their needs to provide appropriate support. And finally, prematurity is a risk factor. It is not a diagnosis. Premature birth places children at higher risk for long-term difficulties. It does not mean they will have them. Some children born just a couple of weeks early may have quite significant difficulties in school, but some children, and we know from our research indeed, born at 23 or 24 weeks of gestation have absolutely no difficulties at all. So it doesn't mean your child will have difficulties, it is a risk factor. But ultimately, preterm born children, they may be in neonatal care for 12 weeks, for 12 months, but they are 12 years in education. And so with the right support in schools and in early years providers, we have a real window of opportunity to try and improve outcomes for these children. And that's where I leave it for this my first offering today. So now I am delighted to introduce Katrina Ogilvie, who is the founder of the Smallest Things charity. And she's going to tell you a little bit more about the work of the charity and those resources I mentioned earlier, and to tell you all about the charity's Prem Aware Award. Over to you.
Thank you, Sam. Hello, everybody. As a parent of 2 children born prematurely, I've heard Sam speak before, but I always go away every time I hear her speak with more ideas and more, yep, that sounds like both of my children. So thank you, Sam. And I think parents at home will be tapping into a lot of what you've talked about this morning. I'm going to talk specifically today about the Smallest Things charity and the Prem Aware Award that we've established for schools. The Smallest Things was founded by parents, very much for parents. We get it. We've been there in neonatal care before, but we've also been on that journey that we know lasts long after you leave the hospital unit. And what we want to do as a charity is to create a better world for families and children after they've left the unit. We want to ensure that all children born prematurely have the best possible outcomes and do well. And for parents, particularly of school-age children, wanting to know that our kids are going to do well when they go to school. We know parents, all parents, worry about sending their children off to nursery, off to preschool, off to school. For me, myself, I've got a child in year 6, getting a little bit worried about sending him off to a big secondary school as well. But for parents who've been through this journey, it can be more worrying, more anxious. And we want schools to be ready for our children. We don't want parents to be worried about, are their children ready to go to school? Are they ready for that next transition step? We want parents to be reassured that the schools are ready for them. Everything that we do as a charity, the parent voice, be it through us as trustees or our supporters, really run through everything that we do. And that's why we created the Prem Aware Award. Parents have been telling us for a number of years now that there needs to be more awareness and understanding of educational needs for children in school. As Sam was saying just a few minutes ago, parents will often say that they feel their child is slipping under the radar, or not to worry because your child will catch up. More than 90% of parents in a recent survey told us there needs to be more awareness, and less than half of parents said that they thought their child's school understood their child's learning needs. There's a quote from a parent here that will probably resonate with lots of parents joining us online today. And they said that their son had had their developmental check in hospital, which was corrected alongside his actual date, but no further assessments had been undertaken. And they felt very strongly that training was needed for school staff so that they fully understood the impact of being born premature. And they were delighted of the work that the smallest things and researchers were doing to try and bridge that gap. But why is this so important? Why do we want schools to take steps to be more aware of the needs of children born prematurely? Well, I mean, the one big reason, apart from all of us as parents wanting our kids to do the best they can do when they get to school and to be supported through that lasting journey, we know that 2 to 3 children in every average size class may have been born prematurely. That's a lot of children out there. If you put that through a whole school, that's a lot of children that may need additional support. And we'd like parents to know that those teachers will be able to support any specific needs their child has, but that these children are supported throughout their educational journey. And what do we want to achieve by what we're doing as a charity at the moment? We want to improve that awareness and understanding of school staff. And we want to reassure parents that when their child goes to school, that the school will be aware and compassionate towards the potential needs that your child may have. Most importantly, we want to skill the teachers so that they have the knowledge to be able to support the learning needs that children may have, and to be able to identify in a timely manner when a child may need some additional help and support. And looking ahead, we want to improve those long-term outcomes. We want all children born prematurely to do well in school. The best thing about the Prem Aware Award, it's actually really simple for schools to do. It doesn't take long, but it has a massive impact, as we'll hear later today from teachers who've undertaken the training and gone through the process. So what do we ask schools to do? Well, the first thing is to train staff. Sam will be talking a little bit later about a free online resource called the PRISM training, which was developed specifically for educational staff. But lots of parents we know have gone through the training and have said how beneficial it has been for them. The best thing about the training is it's free to access and doesn't take long. And Sam will be talking a little bit more about the training later today. We've had feedback from teachers and from parents who've gone through the training. And one parent told us she'd had a 23-weeker, that she felt a huge sense of relief that there was finally a resource that was available to help educational staff understand the social, emotional and the academic needs of their school-age child. They felt that this resource was long overdue, and it rightly focuses on the lifelong needs of children born prematurely and the challenges that they may have after the neonatal unit and into their school life. Secondly, we want to raise
awareness. As Sam was saying, it's useful for parents to share details of their child's preterm birth history, but often schools don't ask a specific question on this. So step 2 of becoming a Prem Aware school is to change the registration forms, to have a question on there alongside all the other questions that you might be asked about your family, how you get to school, and all the other details about your child. The one thing that is often missing is around birth history. So we ask schools just to pop a question on there so that parents, if they want to, can share details of their child's premature birth history. I certainly know, from my experience as a parent, I wasn't sure whether I should share that information with my child's school. There didn't seem to be a process where I could share that information, but having a little prompt when your child starts school can allow parents just to share those details. And then teachers in the classroom can be aware of which children may have been born prematurely and may be able to look out for some of those subtle needs that children born preterm often have. And then the final step of becoming a Prem Aware school is to work together with parents and carers of children, asking for feedback. We know most recently one of our newest Prem Aware schools has arranged a forum for parents of children born preterm so that they can get together to discuss their experiences, but also to help that particular school shape the support that they are offering to their families. What do the schools tell us about the Prem Aware Award? The schools give us such great feedback, and I'm really excited for you to hear from some of our Prem Aware schools and teachers later in today's session. They tell us that it gives them, and particularly the training gives them, a greater oversight of the needs that children may have, and they feel better able to support the specific learning needs of those children. We've been building momentum over the last year or so in terms of our Prem Aware Award. We now have Prem Aware schools across the UK. We also have inquiries from other countries as well. So watch this space. You never know. We might be going bigger. The number of schools that are Prem Aware at the moment, these numbers were put on this presentation last week. They've actually increased since then. So we have on this 35 Prem Aware schools in total. 24 have pledged to become Prem Aware by November 2023, and 20 are completing the process. With a few more inquiries and new Prem Aware schools we've had in the last week, we are very nearly at 100 Prem Aware schools so far in the UK. But there are a lot of schools in the UK, and our aim is for all schools in the UK to become Prem Aware by 2030. And we really would ask parents today to go back to their schools, or teachers who may be joining, to talk to your schools about undertaking the training that Sam will be talking about later, and following these 3 very simple steps that don't take long to do, but will have an enormous impact, ensuring that schools are ready to support the needs of children born prematurely. I'm really delighted now to introduce our next guest speaker. Nicola Scott was born at 24 weeks, and she's now a school nurse and one of our own Prem Aware ambassadors, going into schools and speaking about our Prem Aware scheme and the educational needs that some children born prematurely may have. Nicola's going to speak with Sarah, one of our directors, about her own school experiences, and maybe offer a little bit of advice for parents out there today.
Welcome, Nigma. Thank you so much for being here this morning. As we've just heard, you're one of our ambassadors, and you were born back in 1989 at 24 weeks, and you're also a school nurse. So I'm going to dive straight into the questions. Should we start off by talking about your role as an ambassador? Why did you want to become an ambassador for the Prem Aware Award? So I came across some of these things when I was doing a dissertation, and because I was using my own experiences in the dissertation, It was about the long-term needs of preterm children. So I was doing the research and I came across the Smallest Things website, and it was such a revelation because I'd not heard of any research that had been done, or nothing that was being promoted in schools at that point. So as soon as I found out about the charity, what it does, I knew that I wanted to sign up and become an ambassador, because I can use my own experiences. And I'm in a great position as a school nurse to be able to go into schools as well. So yeah, I just wanted to use my own experiences to help others.
I mean, that sounds brilliant. I know that you're in Newham in London. That's your patch, and as an ambassador, so you're approaching schools and you've got big plans. Can you tell us a bit about those?
Sure, yes. So my eventual aim is for every school in Newham to become Prem Aware. We've got about 100 schools in Newham. So if we could get Newham and be the first Prem Aware borough, that would be amazing. And the schools have been quite receptive to it as well, which is brilliant. Like I said, as a school nurse, I have access to all those schools, so I can just go in and say, this is something that, you know, we're promoting, and would you be interested in it?
So yeah, in terms of long term, I'd like to set up a subgroup within our team focused on the long term needs of premature children, and promoting the Prem Aware Award as part of that as well. The other thing is we always send out school health entry questionnaires to all parents when their children are starting reception. And as school nurses, we are that link between healthcare and education. That is one of our roles. So if we can identify those children that might be at risk because they were born preterm, it would allow us to give schools a bit more of a heads up. It would allow us to look at their development a bit closer, and it means there's less surprises down the road. So that's also something that I'm pushing for at the moment, is to change our school health entry questionnaire so that it says there's a question on there about was your child born prematurely. So then as healthcare professionals, we can be aware of them as well.
That sounds amazing. I mean, I wish that questionnaire had been around when my premature child was starting school, because that would just have been a really simple way to let them know about premature birth. Now, can you tell me a bit about your career? You initially trained as a teacher, but now you're a school nurse. Do you want to tell us about what inspired your career choices?
Yeah, so I always knew that I wanted to work with children. I've always got on well with children from a young age, probably because I'm quite childish myself. So I find it quite easy to relate to them. And when I was little, I always wanted to be a nurse. So there's lots of pictures of me with my little teddy bears who were my patients, and I was looking after them. But when I got to the age of 18, I was like, I'm not sure if I can handle the emotional side of nursing. And I think that might be too much for me. So I had a friend that was training to be a primary school teacher. She sounded like she was having a great time. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe I'll try primary school teaching, see how that goes. So I qualified as a primary school teacher in 2011. Then I went and moved to Abu Dhabi for about a year as a newly qualified teacher. Right. And then after that, I moved back to London and I started working more in the early years. So I was working in private nurseries as their preschool teacher, which was something I really enjoyed. And it surprised me as well, because my role prior to that had always been very focused on the education side of things. But when it was in the nurseries, there was an element of the caring side of things as well. So I was like, yeah, I'm enjoying this. I also started getting quite bored at the weekends because I was a lot younger and I was able to do a lot more things. Yeah. So I started volunteering for St. John Ambulance in 2014 doing first aid events, and I got to work alongside some doctors and nurses, and I was doing a lot of work with them, doing a lot of events every weekend at one point, and I just started really enjoying it so much that it kind of came back to me, the idea of nursing, and I was like, yeah, maybe this is something I should run with. Like, I'm quite a big believer in trusting your gut instincts, and my gut instincts were telling me to go for it. So I applied in July 2015 and I started the course in September 2015. So it was a very last minute sort of thing. But yeah, I got through that. My first job after qualifying as a nurse was in paediatric intensive care.
Okay.
So I worked there for about a year, and it was interesting in a way because we were supporting
a lot of babies that had come from NICU and they still needed some intensive care.
Yeah.
So they were too old for NICU, but they were in the PICU. But it started really affecting my mental health at that point, because there were children there that were born at the same age as me. Some of them were born younger and they weren't making it. And it was almost like a survivor's guilt sort of thing.
Yeah.
I was like, well, why was I okay and they're not, even though this is like maybe 25 years later.
Yeah.
So I knew that I wanted to work with children that were well for a while, because I needed to step away from the pediatric intensive care side of things. And school nursing I was drawn to it just because it's an element of teaching and healthcare. And I get to use the skills that I've developed in teaching. And yeah, it just seemed like it was going to be a really good job, and it has been so far. So yeah, I've been a school nurse for about 5 years now.
So that was your moment. That was the right time for you to take on that direction.
Yes, yeah.
Oh, that is great to hear. Now, if I could take you right back to the beginning. So as we know, back in 1989, you were born at 24 weeks, making you one of the most premature babies to survive. And we've got a screenshot on camera now. You made the papers. You were that tiny. And sadly, your twin sister, Amanda, didn't survive. She died after a few days. But do you know much about your first few weeks in NICU?
So I know we were both blue lighted to the Rosie in Cambridge at Happy Brooks, under police escort, because where I was born in Ipswich, they just didn't have the facilities to cope with that. But my mum wasn't allowed to stay there, so she had to make that journey every day with two very little babies, and you know, so it was really overwhelming for her as well. So I think I was 1 pound 8 ounces when I was born. And mum always says that I made a 30 centimetre ruler look like massive compared to me. And yeah, I think the doctors gave me a 4% chance of survival at that point. And that was just surviving, you know, not even in terms of long-term prospects. My mum said she had to live hour by hour, basically. And every hour that I was still alive, basically, was a good hour for her. So yeah, I think I was in NICU for about a month, and there's a photo of me. I couldn't find it to send it to you, but I'm on my side in the incubator and I'm giving like a little thumbs up. And my mum knew, she said she knew that at that point, that was when she knew that I would be okay.
Oh, that's
so yeah. And yeah, after NICU, I think I spent another 3 months back in Ipswich, on the special care baby unit. And then I was well enough to go home.
I mean, gosh, I feel, having been there myself, I am relating to your mum, as I know many people watching will do. That journey to the NICU and watching your baby in an incubator, it's just absolutely terrifying. I wonder if we could go back to growing up a little bit. Did you notice, as you were growing up, in your sort of early years and primary school years, any consequences of being in the neonatal intensive care for so long?
Yeah, and I didn't realise it at the time, but there definitely were long-term consequences. I have no conscious memory of any of it, but there were a few things in my childhood that, looking back, I'm like, yeah, that was probably because of the early experiences. So for the longest time, I hated my feet being touched by anyone. And obviously when you're growing up, you need to have your shoes and your school shoes, and you need to get your feet measured for that. I think I got blacklisted from basically every shoe shop in Ipswich, because I would suddenly turn from being this like quiet, placid little girl to being an absolute monster who was kicking and screaming and fighting. And yeah, at the time it was just like, oh, she's just being difficult. But now I think it was just because of the amount of heel prick tests that I would have had to have in intensive care. And yeah, I think I just decided by that point, no one's touching my feet. And I've still got some scars on my wrists and hands, that you can see from when they tried to take blood and all that sort of thing. So yeah, the other thing was wind. I hated the sound of wind as a child. And I was really scared of it. So like when it got quite gusty, I mean, we had like a 2-story house and my bedroom was on the top. So when it got really gusty, I would just get really scared. And I think that's because I was on like oxygen for quite a while. And I think that maybe that was related to it because the sound would have been quite similar.
Yeah.
And apparently mum says that like when I was well enough just to have like a waft of oxygen with a mask, I just used to turn my face away from it. And they would constantly like having to roll me back over, so that I could still have the oxygen. And then when I actually started working in paediatric intensive care, the other thing was the noise, like it just hits you. And I think on a subconscious level, my brain was just like, why are we back here? You know?
Yeah.
I know the matrons would come round every day and they'd be like, Nicola, you look really nervous. Are you okay? And I felt really calm at the time. You know, I could have the most stable patient ever that didn't really need a lot of intensive care. And apparently I just still look really nervous. And I think that probably is because subconsciously hearing all those alarms and beeps and all that thing going off.
It stayed with you.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us a bit about your time at primary school? You know, we've been hearing about the Prem Aware Award and about difficulties some children born prematurely have when they go to school. Did you have any difficulties at primary school?
I definitely did, yeah. It wasn't really anything that got picked up at the time, just because I don't think schools had much awareness. I mean, this was in the 90s, and I went to quite a small little village school, so they weren't exactly on the front line of educational development. But I remember I really struggled to make friends, and I had friends, but I wouldn't tell you they were my friends. And I think part of me was kind of always searching for that sort of relationship with the twin that I'd lost.
Right.
And I always wanted a friend that could like not replace the twin Amanda, but would be at that sort of similar closeness. And I never really found it in primary school. I got bullied quite a lot as well because I looked a little bit different to the other children. So I got called ugly quite a lot at school. And
kids are mean, aren't
I
they?
know, yeah. And it was things like I was the last in my class to move on to pen. And they only really did that as a sympathy thing because everyone else had already moved on to pen. But my writing was really terrible. We later found out that I had dyspraxia, or developmental coordination disorder, which is probably why I was struggling with everything.
But not back then.
No. So back then, I remember in year 2, my teacher just telling me that I was lazy. And the other thing about not wanting to speak up in class, that was definitely me as well. So I remember again in year 2, the teacher said, if anyone else comes up because their pencil's broken and they want to sharpen the pencil, I'm not going to give it to you. And my pencil broke. So I just sat there and I didn't do any work. And then the teacher was like, why haven't you done your work? So I was like, well, it didn't go up. So I just kind of sat there. I was very quiet. I did have a brilliant teacher actually in year 3. I can still remember Alison Chester. And she was one of the first people who she actually looked at beyond all the things that I couldn't do. And she kind of saw the potential of what I could do.
Okay.
And she almost took me under her wing in a way. And like, she was the first person to really advocate for me. And I think she was definitely one of my inspirations for wanting to become a teacher myself as well. We also had the same date of birth. So it was, we were like little friends basically. And she was like my biggest fan in a way at school when most people would just ignore me. So I think I really needed that at the time.
So we need to all be more Mrs. Chester.
Yeah.
We need more of her. Oh, amazing.
So one of the things she did, I was always good at English. Hated maths, which I've later found out is very common.
Yes.
But couldn't do maths at all, but I loved English. And she actually submitted a poem that I'd written to be published in like a book of poems from school children in Suffolk. And I remember I hadn't even done what like the class had been told to do. I kind of just went a bit rogue and did my own thing. But she was like, I'm going to submit it because it's really good. So that like made me feel really proud. But things like PE, art I really struggled with as well because I felt like I had all these ideas in my head and I just couldn't get them onto the paper. So I used to get really frustrated. And apparently, I don't remember this, but my mum told me once I got so frustrated at not being able to do it, I just went round and scribbled on everyone else's work and ruined theirs as well.
But that is that frustration, isn't it?
Yeah.
Of not being able to get out what's in your head.
It was just that way of expressing it. So apologies to anyone that, might have done £1 million painting at that time, but yeah.
And what about secondary school? Obviously, you moved on from primary school. Was it any different for you? Because, you must have done well. You passed your exams, right, to train as a teacher.
I did,
Is it different?
Yeah. So in secondary school, I just kind of faded into the background, really.
Right.
And to be honest, I was fine with that at the time.
Yep.
I was very quiet. I was very shy. Didn't really interact much with the teachers. I did enough work to pass. And yeah, I did. I mean, I passed my GCSEs. I didn't do amazingly in them, but I got the grades that I needed to get into university. I also didn't revise for my exams at all because I really struggled with concentration and like creating a revision plan. All that kind of thing was just beyond me at that point. So I just kind of went in with them. And yeah, I did averagely, but I always think a C for me is probably more like an A for, yeah. So yeah, I'm proud of the results that I got. And
well, it clearly hasn't held you back being born prematurely, hasn't held you back in your amazing achievements and career. And I totally understand why you're now sort of getting those schools to become Prem Aware. But looking back, how do you feel about the experience? Is there anything you wish those schools had known or done differently with the benefit of hindsight and all of the research we've been hearing about?
Absolutely, yeah. I wish there had been more awareness of the long-term needs of premature children at that time, because we're not lazy. We're not doing things because we're trying to be difficult. It's something. It's almost a medical thing.
Yeah.
And yeah, to be labelled as lazy and stuff can be really, really damaging. And just to acknowledge it as well. So I remember it wasn't at school, but when I was at university, I was finding things a bit difficult. So I went to the head of welfare and hadn't really asked for that sort of help before. So when she said, what's happened to you? I went right back to the start and I was like, well, I was born premature and I did this and this happened and then this happened and then this happened. And she was quite dismissive of that. And then a few months later, the same woman was giving a lecture to us as training teachers about her pastoral role. And she actually said, people come to me with all sorts of silly things like, I was born a premature baby. She didn't know that I was sitting in the audience. But I can always remember just feeling so ashamed and so small because everyone was laughing and I was like, hang on a minute. And it turns out, it is, it's not, it has been affecting me. So
absolutely.
I am actually tempted to send her some of the research that's been coming out. Yeah. Actually, who was right about that? So.
Well, this is why the work you're doing as an ambassador, we're doing as a charity is so important to get that awareness into schools.
Yeah.
So last question, there's going to be people watching now who've had premature babies like me, and they might be worried about their children's education and future. What would you say to those parents and carers?
So I'd say be the advocate for your child because you know them best. And if you feel that they need extra support, then don't be scared to fight for that support. Hopefully we'll be on the sidelines educating the schools and getting that awareness. But yeah, obviously parents are the ones that know their children best. And just be proud of everything that your children achieve, because even what seems like a very small milestone to a term baby can be something really significant for someone that's been born preterm. So yeah, just be proud of them as well.
Well, thank you, Nicole. I could carry on talking to you all morning, because I just love hearing what you've got to say and the perspective you've got. But I'm going to hand over now to Professor Samantha Johnson, who's going to tell us all about how schools can increase support and understanding of prematurity.
Thank you. And that was absolutely fascinating. Thank you. It's wonderful to hear your experiences and actually how important you feel it is to, have awareness in schools. So in the next few minutes, I want to tell you very briefly about some of the work myself and my colleagues in the PRISM research team have been doing to try and improve support in schools for prematurely born children if they may need it. So first of all, why do we need to improve support in schools? Well, we've already heard from Katrina that the research shows that if around 8% of children are born preterm, that means that in an average size primary school class, 2 children may have been born preterm. We also know that the vast majority of preterm born children will attend mainstream school. And that means supporting preterm children is not just the role of special schools or special educational needs coordinators, but it means that all teachers and early years practitioners are likely to be responsible for supporting preterm children at some point in their careers. And that those teachers need to be able to recognise the possible difficulties associated with premature birth, to identify if a child needs support and provide support where appropriate, because as we've already heard, these children may fall under the radar. So to really get a feel for, what parents are telling us is that schools maybe up to that point had been lacking in some awareness of prematurity, and certainly as researchers we very much communicate our results to in medical journals and to clinicians. I guess we haven't been as good at communicating them to education professionals, who are the people that matter to support children in schools. So a few years ago, before we developed our resources, we did a large survey of teachers in the UK. And teachers told us, or about 75% of the teachers who filled in our survey, they told us that they felt if a parent discloses a child's preterm birth history, that would be beneficial for the child. But the difficulty was, alongside that, only very few teachers actually knew what prematurity meant for the child and what that effect that might have on a child's long-term development. And so knowing a child was born preterm may not have been that helpful in knowing where to provide support. We also found out that for teachers, the poorest knowledge of the areas of knowledge that related to the long-term outcomes of prematurity related to the fact that teachers said they weren't particularly aware that prematurely born children were at high risk for attention, for social, and for mathematics difficulties, which, as we've already heard earlier today, are some of the most common difficulties associated with premature birth. And I think that finding was quite worrying, in that we felt that prematurely born children may not be getting the support in the areas they may need it the most. But overwhelmingly, it was really positive. And over 90% of the teachers we surveyed desperately wanted to know more about premature birth and how they can support children in the school so they can try and improve children's outcomes. So as part of the PRISM study research team, our aim was to develop a free online e-learning resource for education professionals, for primary teachers, secondary school teachers, early years providers, to help raise awareness of prematurity in school, to help improve teachers and other school staff's knowledge of the long-term consequences of premature birth, and to provide teachers, most importantly, with practical strategies they can use to support children who have difficulties associated with their premature birth. So to do this, we were extremely lucky to receive funding from Action Medical Research, which is a charity that aims to save and improve children's lives. And we were able, with that funding, to develop our free online e-learning resource. But first of all, we knew it was really important to co-design the resource. So we got together over 24 people in one room for a whole day to tell us what they wanted in this e-learning resource. And this included teachers, teaching assistants, special educational needs coordinators, education professionals, parents of prematurely born children, and young adults themselves who had been born premature. And they told us what they felt the school needed to know. And we collected that information and used that alongside the research evidence to build the content for this e-learning resource. So in 2019, we finally developed, tested, and then released our free online e-learning resource, which you can find on the internet at worldwideweb.pretermbirth.info. It's completely available freely, thanks to Action Medical Research. And it has 5 separate sections in it. And those sections of evidence from the research relate to exactly what I told you earlier this morning. They tell teachers and school staff what premature birth is, how it might affect children's educational outcomes, how it might affect children's cognitive and motor development, and how it might affect their behaviour, social and emotional outcomes. And crucially, the 5th section provides teachers and other school staff with practical strategies they can use to support prematurely born children in school. And these are focused around supporting children who have the kinds of difficulties most commonly associated with preterm birth, as shown there in that picture on the right. So the 6 areas of learning in which your prematurely born child may need support. Before we released the e-learning resource, we wanted to check it was actually useful. So we carried out a study which showed that if teachers use the PRISM e-learning resource, it significantly improved their knowledge of the long-term consequences of premature birth and their confidence in supporting prematurely born children in the classroom. If you go to the website, this is how it will look when you arrive at the landing page. You'll see it's 5 separate sections. You can access them individually, and each one of those is designed not to take too long to complete. We expect it takes around 1 to 1.5 hours to complete in total, but you can dip in and out of it as you wish. And all of the information in there was designed with other parents and with teachers to be very accessible and to present the research in a completely accessible way. We know from some information about who uses our resource that about 50–60% of the people who use the e-learning resource are education professionals, teachers, early years providers, educational psychologists, for example. But we've also found that about 20% of people using our e-learning resource are parents. And in fact, that proportion is increasing all the time. And we've already heard from Katrina that parents have found it particularly easy to use. And we know that parents are finding it helpful in helping them learn about the kinds of difficulties their preterm born child might have and giving them the evidence they need to feel empowered to approach the child's school about their child's prematurity and to help them advocate if they feel their child needs additional support in school. So please do go online at pretermbirth.info and take a look at the e-learning resource. We hope you will enjoy it and find it useful. There's also this summary poster, which is referenced in the Prem Aware Award, where they ask schools to display this poster. And this is freely available for you to download a copy as PDF from the website. And this is very helpful for you to be able to take this to the school if you want a quick 5-minute elevator pitch, as in why should you be concerned about prematurity and what training is available for free. So I do hope that you will find that useful as parents. And just very briefly, a quick thank you to everybody in the PRISM study team who has worked really hard to develop these resources. So I'm going to pass over now to Sarah again, who's going to introduce our next section.
So our next section is hearing from the teachers. We're going to hear from 4 educators from Prem Aware schools. And you can see their names on the screen there. And that's a picture of me with Chloe Dilks, the head teacher at Ashby Wilsley School, presenting the school with the Prem Aware the Prem Aware Award certificate just last week. And so it was really exciting to be able to go into that school and to hear and see all the differences they were making. So I'm going to play a short video now of some teachers from Prem Aware schools telling us about why they wanted to become Prem Aware, some of the changes they've made, how they found the training, and the differences it's made to their school community.
So we had a parent of one of our new starters who approached us and just wanted us to know that their child had been prematurely born and wanted us really to share the information about your charity and that this training. So she forwarded the link to the training. So all of the senior leadership team completed that and we shared that with other staff so that we can support the children coming in. So it came from a parent.
I suppose it was very much a project from the heart. My own daughter was born 10 years ago. She was born 28 weeks. She was at 720 grams, so £1.9, and she was in the baby unit for 98 days, so 14 weeks in total. Again, I was aware of the smallest things. I followed them for a long time, again due to my own experiences, and realised that they did do a Prem Aware Award, and I thought for us I felt like it was the right fit. And again, a way to really connect with our families and ensure we get it right for every child.
I first found out about the Prem Aware Award for personal reasons. My twins were born at 30 weeks and 4 days gestation in 2019. I went on to do a master's looking into follow-up care after children were in a neonatal unit, and I came across the smallest things and I loved the work that they did, and I noticed this scheme that they ran and I thought it looked like brilliant CPD for my setting.
We first found out about the award when one of the volunteers, Julia, emailed school and asked for a meeting. So she came into a school, she talked us through the award, talked to us through the charity, and really what we could do to support children in our school who were born prematurely.
So for me, it's not necessarily just about having the award, it's about providing the best education for children. So we have a Senko, we have our children who have got, lots of additional needs, but we've never perhaps considered how premature birth can actually affect children. So it's very much about ensuring that all the children needs are met and actually understanding what those are for premature children.
I wanted my setting to become Prem Aware for a few reasons. Firstly, so that the teachers had a really strong awareness of some of the potential needs of children born preterm, to raise their awareness. And as a comfort for parents, because I think when you're leaving your children somewhere, for them to say to you that they have an understanding of your child's needs and your child's experience is a very comforting thing.
The award was really something I wanted to achieve for our school because one of the children in my class, in my Year 5 class, has lasting difficulties because of her prematurity. And it was something that I was already interested in, but I hadn't heard of the charity and I hadn't heard of the award. So Julia's email came at a good time. And what I wanted to do was find out more information about difficulties children can face when they're born prematurely, and really raise awareness of that in school so we could provide the best sort of education, the best support we can for children that this does affect.
For me, I am a mum of a child that was premature, so I found it really interesting. But it's also, as somebody who works long hours, it was actually really accessible. So it's easy to access, easy to follow the resources. So I could sort of do it in my own time. It didn't take me too long, which is an important thing when you're busy. But very accessible, really interesting. I think I learned a lot of things, so in terms of my own life, but also as to how I can change things in school. So it was very easy to use.
We put together an intervention action plan and really thought about the experience that we wanted staff to get. So originally I started doing the prison training, we then cascaded this to staff, and I have to say they all reported it was a very positive experience. Again, a really, really positive tool to raise awareness and also to develop capacity within staff and to develop their confidence.
The PRISM training was brilliant. It took between 1 and 2 hours, but because it's modular, we could dip in and out. It was clearly research-based, and even as somebody who, as a parent, has been through the neonatal experience and then did research in the area, I still found out so many things that I had no idea about. It was really eye-opening. It was at times a bit difficult, but it was also very uplifting and very optimistic. It was really high-quality CPD.
The training itself was really, really interesting. It contained videos and information, as well as lots of tables and charts, which were really fascinating. And what I found was that it really helped me understand the specific difficulties that children who are born prematurely can face throughout their time in school and later on. I then shared that in school in a staff meeting, and also key members of staff across the school did the full training as well. What was really helpful for us was at the end of the training, it provides really useful strategies that for children with a range of difficulties. So we printed all of those off, and we now use those as a basis to set our plans and to set our support plans for those children who might need it.
First one we looked at was the enrolment process and making sure that we knew there'd been a premature birth there. Again, the sooner we know about this, the earlier we can start to build a picture of this child, we can do further assessment, we can make sure that actually we're getting the right agencies in. And again, it's very much early detection, early intervention. From there, we had also looked at how do we get this information out to other schools. So if a pupil moves from us, we put together a pupil transfer record, and again, the premature aspect was also included within that as well, just so it was actually going out with our school as well, and permeating it to the wider education community, I suppose. In terms of Aberhill, we also make sure that the prematurity is recorded within our support for learning registers, so it's always there so staff can access that. And again, for a lot of these children, we also have an individual record of support as well, just to make sure, we're obviously creating a chronology there as to the support that they've had, and what works and what doesn't work, so we're able to develop strategies far earlier. And again, really thinking about putting the pupil's individual needs at the centre of everything that we do. The kind of last section of our intervention action plan was connecting with parents, but actually allowing parents to connect with each other, because often the experience of a premature birth is quite a unique experience. It's atypical, and actually just having that time to connect and to talk to other people that have had that similar experience is a real positive.
The changes we've made so far are that we now routinely ask new families whether their child was born preterm, and we also have a real focus on early maths for children who were born early. That was one of the things we all learned from the PRISM trainings, that children born preterm can sometimes struggle with maths, and we thought if we can put in a targeted early maths curriculum, that would be beneficial for them.
The first thing we did was contact all our parents via our school newsletter to find out which of the children in our school already were born prematurely and whether or not they had any neonatal stays. Something else we have done is we've included that now on our data collection form when children start school. So any children now new to our school, their parents fill their data collection form in, but it has on there if they were born prematurely, if they were, how many weeks were they born, and if they did have any neonatal stays. So it's something now, as soon as anybody starts school, it's something we're aware of, so we can update our records, but also I can meet with those families to see if there are any difficulties or any support that we can put in place to help them.
For me, it's ensuring that we can now share this with other parents coming in the local community so that we can share our understanding. So for me, it's about being able to support all children in the local community. We know the fact that we can support children really well with their other additional needs, but we can support them now regarding prematurity and have those discussions with families so that they feel that that's perhaps valued and important as well.
I think the biggest thing for us is that we can get the right support in place sooner. Staff really understanding that, but also families feeling like we understand our children, that we can support, we can help, and actually that we have the right tools to do so.
The Prem Aware Award, I hope, will be a sign of how inclusive our environment is. We've already seen so many differences, mostly that the staff have such an increased understanding of the impact of being born preterm. I think there's such a temptation to dismiss it as something that happened in early life, but it's really helped my team to understand the ongoing impact.
What I hope for all of our children is that we put the right support in place for anybody who needs it. And this is something else, so an additional piece of information that will really, really support us in that. What we've done already is find out those children who may have difficulties, may have additional difficulties that they need support with now, or they may need support with later on in their time with us. I've met with some of those families, not all of them yet, we are on a journey with it, but I've met with some of those families. I've spoken to them about their child and about some of the needs that they have. And some of those children now have additional plans. Not all of them needed it, but some of those children have additional plans now in place with strategies that we use in class, strategies that we can use, that families can use at home to support their child.
Don't hesitate to do it. So don't hesitate to do it, because I know time is of the essence in a school. We've always got lots to do, but for me, it's something that doesn't take long. You will learn a lot about children and actually start to question perhaps some of the children later on in your school who perhaps have difficulty with their learning. It could be one of the reasons you've not thought about before. So it's interesting, it's fascinating, doesn't take long to do, definitely worthwhile doing.
For us, it's been a really, really positive experience, and I would absolutely 100% do it. I think you need to really consider what your end goal is and how you're going to do that, and again, how you're going to fit that into needs of your context. But I have to say, in terms of the PRISM training, in terms of the smallest things and the support from them as well, has been a really positive experience, and for me I think an invaluable one, and something that we continue to hope to drive forward.
My advice for other schools hoping to become Prem Aware would be to do it. It is such low effort for the amount of impact it has. I do a lot of CPD at my setting, and it really is very high quality CPD, and it really has an impact on children and families.
My main tip really for schools and teachers is to just find out, be curious, talk to families. Make this one of the priorities to ask that question to parents who are currently have children in your school, but also any children new to the school, and do the training. The training is so fascinating, and it really did make a difference to the way that I spoke to these parents and the way that I could inform them on anything that we could put in place really for them.
Wow, I mean, that was a really inspirational and incredible video, and just big thanks to those 4 teachers who took the time to record those videos for us. Now, if you've been inspired to go and ask your school to become Prem Aware, on the screen now you should be able to see our website address and also our email address. So please do have a look at the website. Everything you need is on there, or get in touch with us via email and we can help you approach your school to ask them to be Prem Aware, just like those 4 schools we heard from there. And I think what really struck me was that this is making a difference to pupils' lives and also families' lives, families like me, like yours. This Prem Aware Award is really making a difference for them. And we're going to introduce now Matt Wilkinson, fellow trustee and director of The Smallest Things, and one of those families. Matt has 2 children born prematurely who are at primary school, and he's going to talk to us a little bit about his experience as a parent of children born prematurely.
So I've been a volunteer trustee now for 5 years with The Smallest Things. You see there pictures with my wife Sally and Harry and Isabel. And what I want to talk to you about today is our own experiences of prematurity and moving into the education system. Because I think one of the most important things we can all do, and hopefully you're hearing from other people today, is give, got that passion in yourselves. The most important thing we can do to raise awareness is to talk about it, to share our experiences, to talk to all the agencies around children as well, from the NHS and from schools and other parents all together. The more we talk about it, the more better chance we have got to actually make a difference. So I'll just tell you a little bit about our story to provide some context for you. Got some pictures here. So Sam and Harry were born at 25 weeks gestation back in 2015. You can see a picture of Sam there in the middle. Sadly, he was just 2 weeks and he passed away when he was 16 days old. Harry, you can see there on the left, that's myself holding him there. Got the same watch on still today. Looking at that. Harry spent 107 days in hospital, across a couple of different hospitals, multiple health challenges within that. And obviously you can see there, I always like to give a bit of context and around size when we're showing these pictures. So if you can see the hat, so a lot of you probably this morning might be sat watching this, having a cup of coffee. So you might have gone and made a cup of tea. So to give you a relevant example is the hat that you can see Sam's wearing. If you put that on a mug, it would go inside the mug. That's how size it is. And Harry's £1.10 is the equivalent to 3/4 of a bag of sugar. So to give some context as to how small they're starting out their journey. So we're here talking about the educational attainment of children born premature, but it's really important to remember how small, how tiny, and how fragile these journeys began. Harry's now a crazy 7-year-old. We had our first fishing trip together at the weekend. He loves being outdoors and he loves his activities. And as you've got there, obviously, because we was on the picture on the far right, because Harry's in hospital for, like I said, 107 days. We had our first Christmas in hospital. So his big sister there, Isabel, playing Santa. I've just made a note to myself. I think I'm going to ask him to recreate that photo this year. It'd be interesting to see how it looks. Nearly eight years on, unbelievably so. So a lot of you probably listening today probably been through the premature experience yourself with children, either as a premature baby yourself even, or as a parent of a premature baby. And there's the smallest things, we always talk about how the journey doesn't end when you leave the neonatal unit. It's always beyond NICU and it's after NICU. And obviously that's been a massive part of our experience there. Harry was on oxygen for a total of 6 months. So obviously have oxygen tanks at home and everything that comes with that. And numerous specialists, and can't speak highly enough of everyone that was involved to help with his speech. He had 2 lots of laser eye surgery, so regular eye checkups, and obviously his movement and his strength. And you can see the couple of pictures I've got there was obviously, those of you will know that, you know, lung problems, breathing problems is a massive continual problem for children born premature and very common. So readmissions in winter where a simple cold would quite often for Harry would have become pneumonia. And for those first few years, going back in hospital was quite a regular thing. And you can see him there improvising in the hospital playroom, how he can move around while still having the oxygen tank very close by. And obviously his strength was a key thing to develop, his movement. Obviously we had leg splints for a while there, so different exercises to try and build up his movement so he can get around. And as with all kids, they find a way, and he very quickly, from that picture, there's other pictures where he has managed to get on top of the sofa with those leg splints. They really help him do that. But obviously part of that journey, and when we think about this, is there was regular checkups until he was 6 years old. It was an ongoing thing. There'd be regular appointments with regular agencies' involvement to help his development. But when you think about the development, and we'll think about it for all our children, won't we? Especially when they're born so small, as you start to worry, don't you? You know, will he catch up? Should he be doing more by now? He's so fragile. And we all go through those checks, and you start to correct the age. And you know, when you're correcting by quite a significant period of time, you always think you're behind. You know, you say, "Oh, he'll catch up," and you get fed up of that phrase, don't you? And you want to, you know, worry is normal for anyone, but when it becomes with a premature baby, it's just those little things that really play on your mind. You know, what will that future be like? What will he be able to do? You can see the picture there, and the special chair we had from the hospital to help him sit up because he just couldn't hold his head up when he was tiny. And I hate using the phrase normal. You know, what is normal? But obviously, what we wanted everything to be as normal as possible. You know, compared to what you'd say is an average child. So he would be able to go to nursery, go to school with his peers. You know, what will that future look like for Harry? So if I tell you a little bit about how that experience has been for us, as probably you can tell from we're here today talking about it, that we've always been very open about our experiences, and just very early on, so the best way to try and deal with the situation was to be upfront and tell people all about it. There's nothing to hide about what was going on. You know, I remember those early days, it's when you meet someone new and they go through the conversation about how many kids you've got, and always feel, do I say 2 or 3? And it's a difficult thing. And I think best we just explain and talk about it, say you're open. And that's the approach we took through our education journey. Isabel was actually at the nursery that Harry then went to, so they went through the experience with us of when all this happened very suddenly of having Harry and Sam. So they were amazing. They were very supportive, aware of what's going on, and understood. And if there was any concerns with when coughs and colds are going around in nurseries, they always do, that they make special attention to talk to us because we knew about the situations that Harry would be in. And I think, as I put there, we didn't necessarily want different treatment. We just wanted the awareness of what was going on. Think of those little things, you know, and especially when it comes to starting school, there'll be more medical appointments as I've been through that. There'll be more times I was out of school, more common probably to have time off. And it's certainly over the winter months. And that prematurity, and listening to Sam's presentation a few times, is that it may be a reason if there are development delays. Prematurity may be a reason behind that. So I think if teachers have that information, it can help them make the best decisions. And also specifically to us, we wanted the school to be aware that Harry may talk about his twin. There was one day he came home and told us that there'd been an exercise in the class talking about twins, and some twins was asked to talk, and he said, I didn't go and speak, didn't know, you know, and it just broke your heart that he wasn't sure what to do in those situations. So I think the experience that we've had, and why we really campaigned for this through the Prem Aware Award, you do have to retell the story quite a lot. You can't rely on Harry being his age to retell the story. So I think you do find that experience of how that story doesn't necessarily progress with the teachers and the staff as you move through the school. And every time I listen to Sam, I always think about how he has had some struggles with maths. You can see that, and he does have some challenges when we're in, you know, large group activities. He sometimes struggles to interact in those environments, and you can see It may be that prematurity is part of that, it may not be, but we can see that there has been that impact in Harry, and it could associate that to his experiences. But this is where we are now. And some likes to put there, sometimes you just can't believe the start he had to where he is now. So he's, you know, fast approaching, he'll be 8 years old in October. His attainment is actually doing well. You know, we want to keep helping him, but he's actually doing really well in comparison to his peers. He loves all sorts of different activities. You see him there at Sports Day or with me at Junior Park Run. And as put there at the top of the slide, he is my hero. I think that's absolutely the best way to describe it. So why would we encourage schools to become Prem Aware? Well, I think everything, hopefully what you've heard from this presentation, everything else today will get across to you how important the big difference, and actually listening to those really powerful videos gives you the message that this is actually making a difference to children's lives today. So I think the best thing we can do, it helps raise awareness so schools can understand prematurity is common. So let's normalise. It's a standard conversation that we'd all be having. And also then for the different parts of the scheme, it helps to get support for your child to settle into school. And all know as parents, you've been through a difficult journey yourselves potentially. So it helps you to realise that someone else is thinking about the potential additional needs of your child. As we said, for the scheme, we ask for the missions form to indicate whether your child may have been born premature. So we encourage parents to talk about things up front, normalise asking, not for whether I should or whether I shouldn't say it or not. By asking the question, oh, okay, they're aware of that, then I'll say a little bit about that. You know, teachers have a massively important role in education. We all know that. I think by this scheme, giving them the tools to do that, to consider premature, and that awareness can help make the right decisions to support your child. It becomes like, you know, another tool in their armoury to help them support all our children through education. And by asking for feedback, as we ask for the award, by doing it on a continuing basis, not a one-off thing, helps parents just feel comfortable that they're in that environment, that their children's needs are being met. And I think hopefully what you've heard today will really resonate loudly to you, that that's why we feel that, you know, schools should become Prem Aware. And eventually, not only will we get to the point where searching for a school in the UK, so whether they're Prem Aware or not, is the norm, it'll get to the point where that many schools are Prem Aware, but it's all over the place. And actually, this is just what we want every school to be Prem Aware by 2030 to really make that difference. So I hope that was really good. Thank you for listening to me today, and I will hand back to Sarah to move into our panel discussion.
So I'm here on the panel with three people you've already met this morning. So Nicola Scott, a school nurse and Prem Aware ambassador. We've got Professor Samantha Johnson from the University of Leicester, and we have got Katrina Ogilvie, founder of The Smallest Things. Welcome and thank you. Thank you. Now we've had loads of questions coming in, so I'm going to dive straight into the first one. So somebody who's been watching this morning has asked, they say, my 11-year-old, who was born at 27 weeks, ticks every box, Sam, you were talking about, but I feel few professionals really understand. What can I do?
I think this is something that we hear quite commonly from parents, is they feel that they're really talking to people and they're not listening to what the issues might be. I think it's really about just keep trying. And I think as a parent going forward to approach your school, if you can inform yourself about what the kinds of support your child might need, that might help open up a dialogue. And I do suggest to have a look at the PRISM training and maybe take that poster into school to open up that conversation and say, look, here's the research evidence. Here's what it means. This is a real thing. And this is what the research tells us. And I think that might help you have the evidence to approach the school and advocate for your child. And I think that's where the sort of Prem Aware ambassadors are really coming in helpful to start opening up that conversation.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Katrina, would you like to add anything to that?
Yeah, absolutely. It's really about starting that conversation. And I think what parents say to us is they find that quite difficult because they haven't got the resources to go with them, but there are those resources out there and available. So it's having a look at PRISM training, getting a deeper understanding yourself of what the needs might be, but then being able to take those resources to your child's school so that you can sort of say, you know, you're going armed with the evidence and you can really become an ambassador and advocate for your child in school. And certainly that sort of the feedback that we're getting from parents when they do take these resources into school, actually the schools are really welcoming of them.
And of course, we've got on the website a guidance pack for schools, haven't we? So parents can go onto the Smallest Things website, download that, and send a link to their school, and that's got all of this information in as well. So it's a good way of starting the conversation. Okay, another question we've had in, this one probably for you, Nicola. Did you know that your difficulties at school were related to your early birth? And the second part of the question, should parents speak to their children about it?
So when I was at school, I didn't necessarily know that the difficulties that I had were a result of my premature birth. That came later when I was looking into it myself. And yeah, I just felt that it was me, and that was just it, rather than anything. My family have always been very open with me about my early experiences, and I think they knew on some level that there might be additional support that I needed, even if no one else could see it. So yeah, I'd always advocate being really open with children as well, because it is part of the jigsaw that makes them up, and it can be something really significant. So yeah, I'd say just be open with them.
Yeah, and I know your mum was an advocate for you, wasn't she, talking to the schools during that time as well? So yeah, thank you. Another question we've had in, probably one for you, Katrina. Can secondary schools become Prem Aware? Can they win the Prem Aware Award?
They absolutely can. And we do have some secondary schools in the UK who are Prem Aware, and I think that's a really important thing, particularly for parents. And, you know, I might be sort of hammering this one home because I've got a year 6 child about to go off to secondary school in September. But absolutely, it's a really key transition point. So I think there's 2 things to say about that. One is that absolutely secondary schools can go through the prison training, and Sam will sort of echo that, and become Prem Aware. I think the other thing is to mention is that primary schools, also particularly if they're a Prem Aware primary school and they know they've got a cohort of year 6 children going off to secondary school, please do speak with the parents and say, how would you like us to share this information? Would you like us to speak to the secondary school about the preterm birth and what support your child might need to support that smooth transition?
And another question that came in was at the other end, in the early years, what about nurseries and preschools? Can they become Prem Aware?
Absolutely, and we do have some nurseries and preschools who are Prem Aware at the moment. And again, a lot of the information I think Sam's probably better to speak to on this one is relevant in the prison training for preschools and nurseries. And there is an additional module in the pipeline, isn't there, to specifically focus on those early years and preschools. But yes,
so when we develop the strategies, they're really examples of good practice that people can use in schools, that staff can use in schools to support children with those difficulties we've talked about that prematurely born children might have. And they are quite generic, so they are really relevant across sort of primary and secondary school. And as Katrina has said, we're working with Loughborough University, and we're going to be developing an extra 6th section to go on the prison training, which will be focusing on support in the early years. And that will be useful for hopefully both parents, early years providers, and those teachers who work with the early years to help children transition to primary. So keep an eye out for that.
Oh, that sounds very exciting. And I like what you're saying. It's that information that needs to go with the child, doesn't it? I think we heard it in the video there from Cheryl. It's just keeping that information about prematurity with the child throughout their whole education career. We've had another question in. I think we had a couple of people ask the same question. Perhaps one for you, Sam. A number of parents have been asking if they should think about deferring their school start.
Yeah, this is a really common question, and I think we could probably have a whole webinar on that. Yeah. But I think essentially it's largely down to parental choice and individual circumstances. But we don't really know what is the best approach to take. There have been no definitive sort of robust studies that have definitively answered that question. One of the most scientifically sound studies we carried out a few years ago using data from Germany, looking at whether delaying school entry by a year, so where the child enters school a year later, in terms of both term and preterm born children, what impact that had on their outcomes at school. And in fact, there was no evidence that delaying school entry had any advantage for children born at term or preterm. But that was only early on in primary school, and we don't know what happened at secondary school. I think for those children who are born extremely preterm, especially in the summer months where their extremely preterm birth has meant that they've entered school an academic year earlier than if they've been born at term, in those circumstances, it might be really helpful. But I think we have to remember that most preterm children are born a few weeks early, later moderately preterm, and actually for most children, getting them into school at the right time and getting support in there early from the earliest opportunity is probably the best approach. And I think we probably all agree, actually, we might need to think differently or change possibly the narrative around this, where we think less about, is my premature child ready for school, and more about, is the school ready for my premature child? And that is exactly what the Prem Aware Award is doing. So go out there, get your school to be ready for your child. So it's a fantastic initiative.
Anything you'd like to add there?
I think it's just really echoing what Sam has said. I think as a charity, we really want parents to go out and have a bit more awareness and understanding. I think that this sort of topic hasn't really been spoken about that much. I think lots of parents worry. Lots of parents do consider deferring that school start. But actually, it's really important if you're making that big choice to have all sort of the information available to you. Every family's going to be different, but it's, I think that's the big thing. It's making sure the schools are ready, not about waiting for the child to catch up. Let's get those schools ready for our kids.
What about you, Nicola? Do you know from your parents, did you defer your school start, or did you go?
No, I went to school at the time. Yeah. I don't know if there was even an option to defer.
No.
So yeah,
Back in the 90s. I mean, my daughter born at 28 weeks. Should have been October, was born in August, and she went we didn't defer, she went in the school year she had done, and just finishing her first year of secondary school, and has just, done really well on her learning assessments. So I think it depends, like we know, on the individual, but it's arming parents, isn't it, with that information. That's something to give the school, that you're not making an excuse. I think Erin said it on the video. It's easy to dismiss prematurity, something that happens in the early years. Or you're past that now. We're on to school, that happens in babyhood, but actually, it's something that carries on.
I think you're really right. And I was going to say, if there's those specific needs that a child has, it's so important to support them as early as possible. It's all about the early intervention.
And I think if schools are aware of prematurity, and importantly, what that means, that they can get that support in there straight away, almost preventative if needs be, and they're watching the child and looking at their individual strengths and their needs, and getting that support right from the outset of schooling could be the thing that makes the difference.
Okay, on to the next question. We've had lots coming in this morning, so I want to rattle through them. Somebody has asked, who is the best person to contact at my school about Prem Aware?
Yeah, and Nicola as well as one of our Prem Aware ambassadors who's been speaking with schools. What parents say to us, and it is often parents who are going out to the schools, that the school Senko is the place to start. They're the ones responsible for children's special educational needs, but also, messaging the senior leadership team. If you've got particular concerns about your child's development or how they're doing in the classroom, it's so important to talk to the class teacher about those specific concerns. But in terms of Prem Aware, absolutely school Senkos or head teachers.
I think Matt said it as well about not having to retell it every year, so that the school has got that information that goes with the child. But I think for now, I'm just going to say thank you to the panel, who've been amazing, to Katrina, to Samantha, and to Nicola. And I'm going to hand over to Katrina for some closing words.
It was to say thank you to all our speakers today, and thank you to you for logging on and being with us this morning. A big thank you to our hosts here at the University of Leicester and to the whole team who've helped to put this event on today. You should already have received in your inbox, although you may have to look in your junk box, an evaluation form from today's event. It's so important for us as a charity to have feedback from parents, because it really will help us to plan future events to parents just like us. And finally, please do go over to our website. The link has been sent on the email to find out about how to ask your schools to become Prem Aware. There's a direct link as well to the online training, the PRISM training as well for you to take a look at. So it's over to me to say thank you very much. We really hope you've enjoyed this morning.